Hey, so I want to tell you a little bit of a story with one of our stores, how we were scaling and essentially made a decision to switch from dropshipping to a 3PL, and why I think that was the right decision, and why you're leaving money on the table actually if you continue dropshipping past a certain point of scale. There's obviously a time and place for dropshipping, and there's a reason why many people start with it, but after a certain scale, I think it just becomes important to change. I mean, not necessarily important, but very concretely, your unit economics will improve, your profit margin, your gross margin, just the lifetime value of your customer will improve if you switch to a 3PL. So what happened with this store? I mean, this is in August. We're making something like 135,000 in revenue. We started to scale a bit in September to 177. Then I think in October it was a bit less. Around 140. And obviously Q4, obviously big months, as most of you know, we managed to scale quite nicely in November, already making something like 225,000 revenue per month. And it was sometime around beginning of November that we decided, okay, let's make the switch finally from dropshipping to a 3PL in time for Christmas. That was the idea, that we're going to order our first bulk inventory and have everything set up by Christmas. We didn't manage to hold onto that timeline and completely missed it, and actually still continued dropshipping in Christmas and only did the inventory arrive in January. So that was a bit of a screw up. But still, we eventually managed to make the switch to 3PL. And even though we completely missed, so I can show you that we also made, so in December, we're making something like 300K almost. Our hope was to already have the 3PL set up right before this, like kind of like obviously peak week right before Christmas, which I think is like pretty classic. Like I said, we missed that. Inventory arrived first week of January because there are all kinds of delays and so on and so forth. And even with that, it was worth it. So in this video, I want to kind of tell you a little bit more about the pros and cons of dropshipping versus 3PL, what you should do, and regardless if you're starting off or not, what fulfillment model you should consider, and ultimately what's the best way to fulfill the items of your store, for your business. So let's jump straight in. All right, so to understand why you're leaving money on the table without having at least partially a 3PL and only dropshipping, I think we need to take a step back and just put all the different ways you can actually fulfill the items of your Shopify store. Or actually, we focus on Shopify, but this applies, I think, pretty much for any e-commerce brand. So believe it or not, I actually created a beautiful slide here to make this point, I think, extremely clear and hopefully allow you to also think in a more structured way of just all the different possibilities that you can possibly do to fulfill the items of your Shopify store. So I actually came up with 5 different ways to fulfill items within e-commerce. It's a bit of an overkill, to be honest. I think it really boils down to drop shipping versus using a third-party fulfillment center or 3PL. In any case, I wanted to give you like the whole extensive spectrum. And then I ranked them in terms of, I think, the 4 main factors that everyone thinks about either consciously or subconsciously, which is inventory risk, cost, shipping time, and scaling flexibility. So let's quickly go through it. I think it'll be really helpful for you to just put things into perspective. So number 1 is doing everything yourself. I just included that because, believe it or not, people still do that. And what I mean with that is fulfilling from their garage, which I guess is fine if you're like making cupcakes and selling a couple a day. But in terms of, obviously, if you want any sort of scale, then this is a pretty much horrible idea. I think it's, you might have the illusion, I guess someone would argue, that they're saving time because it's them in the garage packing the boxes. But obviously that's the time they should be spending on like actually building their brand, building their business, thinking how to grow. So you might be saving a little bit short term, but I think it's really just a bad idea to be fulfilling from your garage. There's no expertise there, and you're not going to scale. The shipping time isn't necessarily great either, and I think the cost is a bit of an illusion. Anyway, what most people do to really get into it is drop shipping. So with drop shipping, why do people start? It's because there is no inventory risk, right? The supplier ships out the items for you, and you don't need to buy any inventory upfront, thus no inventory risk. Let me just select the whole row. The cost is actually medium. Why? because you're actually, and I'll get into this on the next slide, you're not getting any bulk discounts if you're drop shipping by definition, right? Because you're buying each item one by one from the supplier. So you can't go to them and be like, hey, give me a bulk discount because I'll buy like 2,000 units in one go, which is what you would do with a 3PL. But the variable costs are actually decent with drop shipping because again, you don't need to pay a warehouse. Again, there's nothing in the middle. You just pay the supplier. There's no storage cost. They kind of take everything into, they give you one price and they kind of take everything into account there. So you are kind of paying for it kind of implicitly, but still it's the variable cost is like relatively okay. Obviously, the huge disadvantages are shipping time and scaling flexibility. Even with like Unixpress, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, like 7 to 10 days from China to the US, it still takes far too long, right? And you get a lot of customers pissed off, obviously, in a 2-day Amazon Prime shipping world. Those shipping times just completely suck. And it's also hard to scale with drop shipping, right? I just showed you our store that, even that month in December where we almost made 300K in revenue, that month, we were still drop shipping and we were definitely pushing the envelope. It is possible, but I think it's just really hard to scale beyond that if you continue drop shipping, right? I think you just need to be in control of your own inventory, even at a much smaller scale, to be honest. Okay, moving on. Then there's like this hybrid between, I would say, drop shipping and having a 3PL, which is agent-based. Like a lot of people do that, where they kind of have an agent in China who does things for them. And I'll quickly skip over it. I think it is, you can improve slightly by having an agent who kind of deals with like multiple suppliers in China for you and kind of is this umbrella for all your operations there. But you still, you actually need to take some inventory risk there already. And you do improve the cost and the shipping time and the scalability somewhat, but it's still not ideal. For me, I'd rather, it's either drop shipping because you're testing a product, and then if you really like want to scale hard and really make the switch to like a proper brand, proper business, then my take is just switch to a 3PL and make the switch fully. Don't kind of half-ass it with the agent-based solution. But anyway, I wanted to put it here because it is a model, and I think in some cases it is also appropriate. Anyway, now we're going to the 3PL. So with the 3PL, obviously why people kind of hesitate to do that, and you need some sort of volume to start, although you'd actually be surprised you don't need that much. I mean, you definitely don't need to be making like 200-300K a month. I think even if you're making 10, 20, 30K a month, it's already really kind of time to think about it, because again, and I'm really talking, we're going to get into this, because your profit margin will increase. We'll get into that in a second. But the one negative is obviously you are going to take inventory risk. You need to buy all those units upfront, and you need to ship them to the 3PL, to the warehouse that's going to fulfill it for you in your country, in your main markets. But beyond that, again, shipping times are great, right? You can offer, 2-day shipping, you can offer overnight shipping, and standard shipping is anyway 3 to 5 days across the US. No one's going to be complaining. You can scale through the roof. I mean, that's also what all the big brands do. Again, you can be making tens of millions a month, just adding 3PLs. Once you have the first one, it's actually pretty easy. And the cost is, it depends on the bulk discounts you get, but it can be better than drop shipping, once again. So really the only downside is the inventory risk. And again, inventory, I wouldn't even see this as a downside if you can kind of forecast your demand and the volume and kind of plan ahead. That's actually something that, a risk you can mitigate, I would say almost fully, because you're in control of your inventory and you are able to manage it fully. There's one more way to actually fulfill, which is what I call supplier warehouse drop shipping. And that's actually a bit outside of your control and a bit of a unique situation. Not really unique, but you have the situation where your supplier is so big that they actually have a warehouse, let's say in the US, your main market, and you can use their warehouse because you're buying from them, and they fulfill it from that warehouse for you, even though you're still drop shipping, right? So it's not, they kind of hold the inventory for you, but because they're already based in that country, right? They have good shipping times. If the warehouse is big enough, you can scale. The cost is actually decent because they already took on the cost themselves of going to the US, right? So that is possible. It's just, again, not really always in your control. It's just many suppliers don't have that, especially in the country where you need it. And I still wanted to include it just to give you the full spectrum. Anyway, and I think, yeah, we kind of talked about those things. Okay, so let's actually, I also wanted to kind of jump back and forth between this beautiful map. So again, this is the same store I showed you. This is the store where we, again, around this time, we decided to shift from dropshipping to a 3PL for the United States, right? Again, the United States being our main market. And you can see on this map all the orders we're making in the United States versus Australia and other countries. I think UK and then, we also sold and still sell to some European countries, but I would say the US is like 90+% of all of our volume. And what you can see is pretty much, let me actually go to the paths layer. So the paths actually show how our orders move from origin to destination, right? And you can see that we're still drop shipping to Australia, right? But within the United States, all orders are actually leaving our 3PL warehouse in Dallas, Texas, right? Which you can also see here. They're all leaving Dallas, Texas, and traveling all around the United States, obviously to our customers. Now, this just shows the last 500 orders. This is by default what gets loaded onto the app. Otherwise, it gets also way too messy. You can like upload like thousands of orders, and then like the whole map is full of lines, and you don't even know what's going on. But I think what's really cool, right, is just to compare. I think the why I chose this store for this particular video, right, is just to really compare. Again, we continue drop shipping in Australia, and obviously the location is just closer to China, right, where our supplier is, and we switched to a 3PL in the US, right. So based on that experience, I can literally like compare it side by side, even in real time, right. Now, again, this model is really classic in the sense that our supplier is based in China, and I would say it's a very, very classic scenario, hopefully that many of you can relate with, where we then kind of sell in the T4 countries, right? US, Australia, UK, and Canada. Anyway, so obviously when you're drop shipping, you just pay the supplier a fixed variable fee, right, to deliver the item from the origin to destination, right? When you want to switch to a 3PL, right, you buy X amount of units in bulk upfront from your supplier. You first ship the units in bulk to your 3PL warehouse. So in this case, we would send like 3,000 units to our warehouse in Dallas, Texas. And from there, we would have a fulfillment cost to ship out all the units to all the individual customers. So I just wanted to make that clear, because if we go back to our slide, you will see that I essentially compared dropshipping versus 3PL side by side. The variable cost is what I talked about, is lower in dropshipping because you just pay one cost per order sent for dropshipping, whereas with 3PL, you first have the freight cost to send it to the 3PL warehouse, and then also the fulfillment cost on top of that. So it is higher with the 3PL, but, and this is the important part I think that a lot of people actually miss in the very beginning, is you get massive bulk discounts if you buy in bulk for a 3PL upfront, right? So again, with dropshipping, you can't do that because you're paying the supplier unit by unit, right? Whereas with the 3PL, right, you tell the exact same supplier, hey, I'm just gonna, instead of paying you unit by unit, how about I buy 3,000 units up front? What's the bulk discount you can offer me? And honestly, like the market rate I see a lot is like 15-20%, but if you negotiate a bit, you can go up to 30%, sometimes even higher, right? So imagine you get the exact same items, but just because you're buying in bulk, you're getting it for like 30% cheaper, sending it to the warehouse, and then sure, you need to, and then there's a fulfillment cost for the warehouse to fulfill the items for you. But because you've saved 30% upfront, you're still cheaper in the end if you do it right. Obviously, you need to make sure the bulk discount makes sense. If for some reason your supplier doesn't give you any bulk discount, then it will be more expensive, right? So those are all the things you need to consider. But again, just speaking from experience, and many of the products we've seen, you're able to get bulk discounts up front, ship it to 3PL, and then really absorb the fulfillment costs on the other end. Just two other quick things to mention is that yes, there will be storage costs by using a third-party warehouse. They're usually quite negligible. I just trying to be as giving you the fullest picture as possible. So it's they usually charge you per cubic meter per month, and it's not that much unless like you have some super weird dimensional product. But for most products, it's really not a big deal. Sure, for dropshipping, you don't have storage costs, or technically the supplier, they have a storage cost that they kind of pass on to you, just under one cost of fulfilling the item. And then other costs with the 3PL, you might have like a monthly subscription cost because you have like a customer agent for your account, all those things. So keep that in mind, but it's also pretty minimal. So again, your profit margin can literally be higher with using a 3PL versus dropshipping because of the bulk discounts that you're able to get upfront before the items even reach a fulfillment center. And even after you've paid the fulfillment center the cost to fulfill each item individually to all your customers, you're still cheaper, right? So that's the point I wanted to make, that your profit margin, if you do this right, will improve by switching to a 3PL. Now, even if you're breaking even, it's still worth it. Why? Because with a 3PL, you have a lot of advantages, right? I hope this goes without saying, but it's just, I'll just say it. If you're fulfilling from a 3PL, you can offer 2 to 3 days shipping pretty much across the country, right? Obviously, it depends where they are and depends where your warehouse is, but you're able to essentially provide, the best in class shipping times. You can then customize your packaging. Most 3PLs offer that. You can put in leaflets. You can just make it seem like it's a professional service of your customer receiving your package, as if you're a massive brand, even though you might not be, right? You might be only making 10, 20K a month, but by using a 3PL, you'll create the impression that you're a professional business. And what does that do? That obviously, increases your retention. It increases your average order value. Why your average order value? In part because it increases the lifetime value of the customers. They're more likely to come back and buy more, and also buy more units per order. But you're also now able to really offer shipping revenue at checkout. So it really just the cost that you ask the customer at the shipping part of the checkout, you're now able to kind of charge them more for 2-day shipping or overnight shipping or whatever it might be. And there'll be a separate video on that. But that's just going to increase your average order value. And through that, your pricing power is going to increase. You're able to start building your brand equity, and all of that will come together for you to actually have just a stronger business, right? Where, again, hard to quantify up front, but I'm telling you, it will just pay off if your customers start trusting you and they start receiving your products, in 2-3 days. You're just able to also be much more aggressive on remarketing, and get them to come back to your website, buy more, and obviously not have to go through the same customer acquisition journey as you did the first time around. And that way, you're able to actually improve your profit margin in the long term much more. I'll quickly go through the decisions you need to make, and I'll make a separate video on that because this one's already getting pretty long. But you need to decide, do I dropship or do I add a 3PL? At least partially, do I add a 3PL? If the answer is no, I'm only going to dropship and I don't even want to try a 3PL, that's completely fine. But according to me, and the data is that you will burn some cash. Your profit margin will just be lower. And again, because of the lifetime value of the customers, you're also just going to be missing out mid to long term, a lot of the profits that you could be making. If, however, you decide, okay, I do want to at least try out the 3PL, right? I think there's several decisions you need to make. So first of all, obviously, which 3PL do I choose? Then how many 3PLs and where? And if yes, how many units do I send? And if you answer those 3 questions very concretely, right, you know which 3PL you want, you know how many 3PLs and where, and again, how many units you want to send, then you will create a stronger Shopify brand, store, business, which is a higher profit margin, and it'll just be a more resilient business. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this video. Check out my other videos where I actually go into how you can do this. This was more a video on the why, and obviously the how is, a bit harder. But first, you need to make the decision. So hopefully, I managed to convince you. Hey, before you bounce, consider subscribing to our channel, but only if you've actually enjoyed the video and found at least a few valuable things for your Shopify store. Also, check out our free Shopify app, Trackidex. We have a link in the description below. We're developing new features literally every day, and we're also excited to actually hear your feedback on some of the next features we should develop. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.